Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
New Mexico has a deep history in the defense industry, much of it dating back to World War II. In Los Alamos, obviously, the development of the atomic bomb, as well as the growth of what we now know as Kirtland Air Force Base. But beyond those major installations, there's also private industry that's come up in New Mexico to support the military and its mission in national defense.
Yeah, one of those companies now making waves here is not your typical defense contractor like, say, the Boeings or Lockheed Martins out there. The company we're talking about today is Castelion, and in some ways, they're a fast-moving tech startup, one that's making a huge investment on the north end of Rio Rancho called Project Ranger. That is a nearly 1,000-acre campus to manufacture hypersonic missiles.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff. We are joined by two guests from Castelion today, co-founder and chief financial officer Andrew Kreitz and Meg Davidson, the senior manager for strategic partnerships. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
For sure. So we did a little bit of research ahead of this topic because admittedly, I didn't know a whole lot about it. But I saw Andrew used to work for SpaceX in LA and Goldman Sachs before that. Meg, it looks like you came from Sandia National Labs.
Yes.
But can each of you just share briefly what's led you all to your current role with Castelion here in New Mexico, and what do you both do exactly?
Absolutely. So I've really geared my whole career. Look, I'm a finance guy by background and by training, but I have really geared my whole career towards aerospace and defense, especially defense. And that is because I care very deeply about national security. It's been an interest of mine for as long as I can remember. And I have, for as long as I can remember, been fascinated with aerospace technology. So this is an area that, for me personally, I find really interesting and which I think is hugely, hugely important for the national interest and for national security. In terms of what I do at Castelion, so I'm one of the co-founders. I helped pull the company together in the early days. In the early days when the company was 10 people and first pioneering our hardware, I used to do a lot of heading out to the desert to support testing, bolting together hardware, the whole shebang of pulling together an aerospace startup and being scrappy and doing whatever we needed to do in order to drive technological and engineering progress. These days, however, I mostly pull together spreadsheets.
Okay.
Well, I'm exaggerating a little bit. So I help manage investor
You're
relations.
a money guy, it seems like.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm in charge of, look, I joke about it sometimes, but fundamentally, what we are trying to do at Castelion, the critical objectives are speed, scale, and cost. The cost piece is really, really important. A big part of our value proposition is being able to produce a lot of these at a cost that is over an order of magnitude lower than comparable systems. If we're going to be able to do that, then we need to be able to deploy capital effectively. We need to manage our money carefully, and that's a big part of my role.
And actually, it was the defense industry that brought me to New Mexico about 10 years ago. My husband, who's active duty Air Force, actually got stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base back in 2015. And so I really haven't left since then. I started working at Sandia National Laboratories pretty much like right after I moved here, and I was supporting a major national hypersonic program over my tenure there, which is about 10 years. Through that role, I did a lot of our strategic partnerships. So that was working a lot with our universities, bringing in novel and kind of nascent research and development and seeing how we can apply that to actual national security challenges. So I'm taking that skill set and bringing it to Castelion. It was actually in the early days of Castelion that they contacted Sandia, and we started partnering with them when they were about 20 employees. And so I became familiar with them during that phase, and when I was offered a position, I jumped right on it because it's definitely a mission area that I'm passionate about.
Interesting. Before we move on, though, you've mentioned 10, 20 employees. How big are you now?
We're about 200 employees today. Most of those are in our headquarters in Torrance, which is the Los Angeles area. We have a team that's working on radars in the Dallas, Texas area. We have some folks in the Washington, D.C. area. And we have our first, I think, 4 employees now and are expanding our team right here in the Albuquerque area.
Very cool. Well, I think there's a lot of layers to Castelion's arrival here in New Mexico that are pretty interesting, and I want to talk a little bit more about the why New Mexico piece and what your company's doing here. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about how Castelion even came to be. You're a defense tech company focusing on hypersonic weaponry. On background, I read an article published in Forbes, this was late last year, which basically described the creation of the company as being spun out of SpaceX after one of your co-founders, Brian Hargis, who was at SpaceX at the time, according to this article write-up, got a call from a Navy officer who was desperate to see another company get into the business of reliably making hypersonic missiles. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the origin story of the company?
No, absolutely. So I was on the SpaceX finance team. I supported financial planning analysis on all of our classified programs and proposal work on our classified programs. Brian, my co-founder, our CEO, was really the program architect and the head business development person on a program that is now called Starshield, which is a classified government satellite capability that SpaceX is developing for the United States. In those seats, and then I should say, sorry, our third co-founder and our COO is Sean Pitt, who worked on selling Falcon 9 launches to allies and partners in Europe, but was also involved in that effort. What I would say is from that seat, we saw the scope of the problem. So we saw how far behind the United States had fallen in scale production of long-range strike. We saw how far behind we were falling in hypersonics. And I think the other really critical ingredient is working at SpaceX. We saw a company and we saw how it was done, right? We saw that high-end satellite systems, reliable orbital launch, getting astronauts to and from the space station. All these things could be done through a different engineering culture. All these things could be done much faster than the traditional development methods that the primes apply. They could be done much cheaper, and they could be done just as well, or in many cases, to be honest, more capably. So we saw the need. We saw that there were alternatives. There are other ways to solve this problem. And to be honest with you, it sort of came down to, look, no one is attacking this in a different way. If we don't go try to tackle it, then who will?
Yeah, seeing a need. And we've heard that this is an area of technology where both China and Russia are considered ahead of the United States in this realm. Can you explain just on a basic level, first, what hypersonic missiles are? Why are they so important to the national defense picture? And why has the U.S. been able to sort of not been able to match its adversaries in this space?
No, absolutely. So hypersonics are a very specific type of missile. They fly very high and very fast, much higher and much faster than most missiles. That altitude and that speed gives them two very important qualities. It gives them range. You can reach out much farther with hypersonics. And because they're going so fast and they're maneuvering, they're much harder to intercept. That makes them very, very dangerous in the hands of our adversaries. It makes them very, very valuable in the hands of the United States as a means of achieving and preserving deterrence and therefore peace. Our company's unofficial motto is peace through deterrence. We want to enable deterrence, conventional deterrence, through scale production of these hypersonics. In terms of how the United States fell behind, it's interesting. A lot of this comes back to the end of the Cold War and the peace dividends in the 1990s. After the wall came down, it certainly looked to everyone during that era that the time, the era in which we would need these sorts of systems had passed. And I think we were all very optimistic. We were optimistic as a country that we were entering a new sort of unipolar world and that things would stay that way. What happened is that they did not stay that way. I think one of the really important events here actually is the 1991 Gulf War. The United States won a major decisive victory. One of the lessons that we took was that our defense buildup during the 1980s, the doctrine, the technologies that we had developed worked, and they did. They worked extremely well. Our adversaries, Russia, China, took the opposite lesson, which is that if they did not change the way they did business, if they did not flip the script, if they did not pursue asymmetric advantages over the United States, what happened to the Iraqis was going to happen to them. So at the same time that we were frankly getting complacent, kind of the 1-2 punch of the Cold War ending and us proving the effectiveness of our approach, at the same time we were getting complacent, our adversaries were really hitting the gas. They started to open that lead through the 90s into the 2000s. And then it's really during the 2010s the United States starts to look at the progress that Russia and especially China are making and starts to make investments in long-range strike and hypersonics again.
We didn't really change the approach to how we were developing these systems. I've seen this from my time at Sandia, where we were taking lab-produced weapon systems that were really just meant for a flight test and trying to produce them at scale, which has a lot of challenges. So I think the one thing that's unique with Castelion is that we are trying to design these systems with that manufacturability and scale up front, which is not something we've seen for the systems that we're currently trying to field as a nation.
Yeah, it's one thing to make something in a lab, but you have highly skilled workers, really technical stuff, and to then put that into a manufacturing complex is a whole different matter, is what it seems like from what I'm hearing from you.
No, 100%.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. The state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on krqe.com or our YouTube channel.
So Castelion comes on scene 2022. By 2023, you're working on a demo for the Air Force Research Lab to develop a low-cost strike weapon. And along with choosing to make your own solid rocket motors by the end of the year, you've got millions in seed funding from what I've researched. And the story goes on with a lot of new tech created and tested. That's one of the big things, right? Create something, test it very quickly. I mentioned Castelion is operating like a fast-moving tech startup, but I just want to ask you, from your perspective, is that accurate? Am I looking at it the right way? Is Castelion like a disruptor, so to speak, maybe in the defense tech industry?
I think that's exactly right. So what's really interesting, our chief engineer, who we worked with at SpaceX, led a major part of the Starshield program. His name's Jacob Swears. He always says, the first thing you build is going to be wrong. The sooner you build it, the faster you find out the ways in which it's wrong. Even the best engineers in the world, there are going to be things that you didn't think of. There are going to be things that do not behave in the real world the way that they behave in computer models. You only uncover those things by getting to hardware quickly, testing early, and iterating fast. If you save up, you have this big waterfall development process, you save all the testing for the end, that's how you end up breaking schedule. You don't find out where the deficiencies are and where the problems are until very late in the game. By getting to hardware quick, you uncover those things early, and you do these fast iteration cycles, and you iterate your way into a very manufacturable, very low cost, and very effective product. We did 21 flight tests in 2025, and each of those flight tests has a specific goal. Some of them were successful, some of them were not, but each time we had very solid learnings that went into the next iteration that moved us very quickly towards an operational system.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
I mean, you learn more by doing and breaking things and understanding what that breaking point is so you can re-engineer it quickly. That's not something that you've seen in these major defense programs. Again, you wait until the very end, and then you have a very high consequence test flight where little risk is accepted. And so it's just a different approach, and it's part of the reason why I think they're going to be so successful.
It seems kind of like common sense, though. I can't help but relate this to, like, I have an elementary school aged child who's, they had a project of like building race cars and racing them and testing, the velocity and things. And the kids are trying to learn, well, what would make the car faster and what would be. So it just seems like a basic thing, right? Like, make the thing, see how it works before you spend tons of money and ultimately fail. But one thing that your company says online is, quote, that America spends too much on defense to get so little in return. We can do better. How has the company positioned itself differently to make advanced weapons faster? Exactly. If there's something tangible you can point to that like we're doing differently.
Sure. So I would say there's two pieces to that. The first is exactly what you were just talking about, exactly what Meg was saying, speed of development. There's this misconception that hardware is very expensive, and because hardware is very expensive and it's very precious, then you can't risk testing it, and that's what causes this long test cycle. However, if you design from the beginning, if your whole engineering approach is oriented around cost and manufacturability, and if you're willing to vertically integrate anywhere you need to vertically integrate, then the hardware becomes very affordable. If the hardware becomes affordable, then that's what increases your learning cycle. If you decrease the amount of time the development takes, you're actually saving a huge amount of money in the development costs, because so much of that development is actually the engineering workforce. It's not the individual pieces of hardware. And if you're designing for manufacturability from the outset, if that is your key objective, then you're driving towards an architecture that is inherently low cost. I'll give you a tangible example. Control actuation system. So that's the mechanism that actually drives the fins on the missile so that you can point where you need to point. Typically, I won't quote details or exact numbers here, but that is typically a very expensive piece of hardware that you're buying from a third party. However, if you're willing to kind of go to first principles, if you're willing to say, okay, we're going to vertically integrate this instead of just buying either something off the shelf or hiring a third-party contractor, we're going to get a team of engineers, we're going to buy the piece parts, we're going to build it up. And if we have a test bed that's going to allow us to do a lot of those test flights and be willing to fail on multiple of those test flights, then we can quickly iterate our way into a CAS, control actuation system, that is both low cost and very manufacturable. And I know it's manufacturable because we're in here in the shop assembling it, and we're figuring out what's hard to build and what isn't. It's not 3 layers down the supply chain and you don't get feedback and things are months late, but you're not really sure why. You're doing it yourself. And when you mess it up and when you test it and it doesn't function correctly, you quickly find out why. And this is the story of a lot of what we were doing in 2025, and we drove towards a very low cost, very manufacturable CAS that will be flight testing further this year.
So you're saying rather than spending a bunch of money on a third party to buy a piece of equipment, you're learning how to build that piece of equipment.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
And a big part of it is, not being scared of doing that in the places where we can get a cost or a schedule advantage, and not being scared, going back to my CFO hat, not being scared to buy capital equipment or make investments to have the capability to do that if it saves us time and if it gets cost out in the long run.
Let's talk a little bit about what Castelion's plans are for New Mexico. So you're working on a big 1,000-acre campus in Sandoval County. It's basically going to be a manufacturing and testing facility. That's under construction right now with a goal of finishing it by the end of the year. Before getting to more about what you'll be doing out there, I did want to ask, why New Mexico? Why did you pick here for this big hub for you?
Well, I think you started it off by just listing all of the history that this state has, the great institutions we have between Los Alamos and Sandia and Kirtland, AFRL. I mean, it's just a hub of innovation for the defense industry. And so we are using that as a great resource and asset to us. They have built up infrastructure that we are willing to take advantage of because it's unique. No one else across the country has some of these unique test assets that they do. And so it just became a great area. And you were part of that site selection. So
Yes. I mean, it was 30-plus state site selection process. And we knew what we needed was we need the right people. We need the right skill set here. And as Meg was alluding to, between Sandia and Los Alamos and Kirtland and all of the supply base that's built up around them, the educational institutions that built up around them, we've got the right people here. There's not many places in the country where you have that kind of a talent base. There really aren't. Then number two, I talk about scale and I talk about speed a lot. Our customers because of the scope of the problem, because of how far ahead our adversaries are, they need these missiles as quickly as possible, which means that we needed to find a set of local and state agencies that were very commercial, that were willing to give us both certainty so that we could commit fully, and who could give us a path to quickly breaking ground and quickly moving forward on construction. And we have been hugely impressed with New Mexico in both regards. We have the right people here. We've been really impressed with Sandoval County and City of Rio Rancho, everyone at state, CID, EDD, Power New Mexico has been excellent. That's often a downfall for these kinds of projects, and they've been great to work with. They are able to help ungate progress. They're able to help us move fast and deliver what our customers are looking for, which is speed and scale.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hey guys, Chad Brummett here with New Mexico Frontiers, the KRQE original series that focuses on tech and innovation happening right here in New Mexico. We've got a lot of great stories about various businesses, technology, and of course space exploration. So make sure that you follow us on air at KRQE and Fox New Mexico, as well as our KRQE YouTube channel online. In the meantime, let's get back to the New Mexico News Insiders.
There are jobs obviously tied to this as well, but anytime a large company declares a big investment in New Mexico with promised jobs, new revenue, at this point, Chris and I have talked about this a lot on the podcast, I think it's fair to say there are some skeptics out there around the idea of will they do as promised. This skepticism comes from the state's history, especially in Albuquerque, seeing big companies promise to build manufacturing facilities that haven't really come to fruition. What do you tell skeptics who ask, will Castelion follow through with its promise to build this facility and bring new jobs?
Well, I think it's fair to be skeptical. I think people should ask those questions. Really, in every aspect of the project, we've sought to be as transparent and as open as possible in answering questions. And what I would say to people that are skeptical, I invite them to drive out to the site. It's a few miles west of Rio Rancho, and if you head out there, you'll see today there are hundreds of people, and there are dozens of heavy construction vehicles, graders, bulldozers. We are going maximum speed right now. We broke ground in November, less than a month after signing the lease. We made a lot of investments on our own dollar over the summer, made investments at risk to ensure that we could go maximum speed. We've got steel going up this week, actually. So we are moving very, very quickly because our customers need us to move really, really quickly. And I know that sometimes these big projects have that sort of track record or reputation of vaporware, but I invite anyone to go out and see the progress we're making right now. We have buildings going up, we have people being hired, and we need initial operating capability by the end of the year.
Workforce is key to that success. And so my role has been really kind of working with CNM, UNM, New Mexico Tech on building out what those workforce development programs look like. And so, there are going to be opportunities where we can do like a reskilling program with CNM so we can make sure that we actually have the talent here to support the scale in which we seek to achieve.
Yeah.
So
this campus, this area that you're bringing life to in Rio Rancho, Sandoval County, this is going to support the large-scale production of hypersonic missiles. And based on what I read from the company, this is more than a $220 million private investment, 21 planned buildings out there, should bring hundreds of jobs for not only construction, but also full-time operations. There will be manufacturing, testing, and final assembly of advanced long-range missiles. What exactly, though, if I can have you describe, what exactly is Castelion going to be developing and making out there?
Absolutely. So this will be the home of scale production for our first product, which is called Blackbeard. That is going to be one of the key parts of the U.S. hypersonics portfolio. It will be the first U.S. hypersonic missile that is being produced at this sort of scale. So what we'll actually be doing at that site is we'll be mixing, casting, and curing the solid rocket motors. So if you picture a missile, the long tube, the motor case, and the nozzle, those will be mixed, cast, and prepared out at the Project Ranger site. And then all of the other parts of the missile, the other structures, the avionics, so that means flight computer, the control actuation system I was talking about earlier, the seeker, all of these other parts will come together, they'll be assembled, they'll be tested, and then they'll be integrated together with that motor case into a finished Blackbeard, into a finished what they call all-up round. And then that's placed in specialized packaging, and it'll be shipped from the Project Ranger site to our customers in the Army and the Navy.
Yeah, you keep saying this is what the customers need, but just to be clear, the customer is the U.S. military, correct?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So that is, Army and Navy today, opportunities emerging with the Air Force soon as well, so the Armed Services.
So to be clear, when you say you're making finished rounds at this future facility, this also means they'll be making weapons that are ready for the U.S. military to use, and the plan to see these finished rounds by early 2027? Is that the thought?
We expect to be shipping our first production units to our customers during calendar 27.
Okay.
When it comes to those finished rounds, I know one of the probably conversations that you had amongst residents, local stakeholders, right, who will be living near the facility is, is it safe? Will you be testing on site? What will and won't be happening at the Castelion campus? Are you going to be firing missiles? It sounds like no from everything I've read, but testing rocket motors. If you can describe to us what all will be happening out there at the site.
Absolutely. So we have the production process I talked about a moment ago. So that's production of the solid rocket motors and then integration of those finished all-up rounds. We'll also have a static fire test stand. So static fire means that the rocket motor is held down and secured, and then our engineers attach various sensors in order to measure performance, and then in a controlled fashion, we fire the rocket motor. Now, that does create some noise in the area. If you're in northern meadows, it'll be about as loud as a vacuum cleaner if you're standing outside your house, and that will last anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds. We expect to do kind of a handful of those tests per week. We're also required per our lease with state land to be compliant with all local noise ordinances. So that's something we're doing work on and ensuring that it doesn't create a disturbance for our neighbors.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be something like at midnight all of a sudden a loud noise is coming, because it has to be in line with local ordinance.
That's exactly right, which also means that, yes, exactly, we have to be doing it during business hours. I think one of the things that's really important to us, and one of the things that's a recurring theme anytime we talk about this, is we want to be good partners and good neighbors and good citizens. We don't want to be, first of all, we're not allowed to, but second of all, we don't want to be firing off motors late at night either, because that's just a rude and unneighborly thing to do. The folks that will be working at the Ranger site will be from the community. These will be our colleagues. These will be our friends. We want to be good stewards of the land, and like I said, we want to be good neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Are there environmental concerns also for those curious with this big manufacturing facility?
Good question. So we've been working really closely with NMED, New Mexico Environment Department. There's also a whole bevy of requirements and regulations that govern the production, storage, and testing and shipment of energetic materials. So those are a lot of federal regulations from the War Department and a lot of state regulations. I would say from an environmental standpoint, the main thing that we're very, very focused on is proper handling of all the inputs into the solid rocket motor process, production process. There's a lot of rules and requirements around those. We're taking on all the best practices in how to handle and how to build our buildings and production processes in ways that are inherently safe, and that's something that we're really, really focused on, and it's something that we've been very open with CID and NMED about.
Okay. Plans include 300 plus jobs in the first 5 years. What types of jobs are we talking about mainly? When are you hoping to hire, and how much, if you can say, roughly will these jobs pay?
Sure, happy to. So our expectation today is those are going to be roughly 1/3, 2/3 white collar sort of engineering type roles to 2/3 touch labor, skilled technician type roles. We've already brought on a number of folks on the engineering side. I expect that we'll continue to hire engineers throughout the year, and we'll also be bringing on a number of different functions related to standing up the site and to manufacturing throughout 2026. I expect that hiring to really ramp late this year. From a compensation perspective, We expect across those blue and white collar jobs, we expect an average compensation of approximately $100,000 a year plus benefits. And, this comes back to our company culture and how important it is that we are bringing on people that are committed to the mission and people that want to build careers. Something that's really important to us is that everyone at Castelion is a part owner in the company. Everyone gets shares as part of their compensation package. We want people to stay with the company for a long time and build skills, and we want folks that feel ownership.
If you are successful, do you see more for New Mexico? Potentially?
I think there is potential to invest more. There's some additional process steps that could be verticalized in the future that we would love to pursue in years to come. And we have, beyond the initial $220 million investment we've talked about, there's additional phases of construction at the site that we hope to invest in the coming years.
I think the conversation of, local manufacturing is obviously one that's been happening nationally as well. But to the bigger mission here of closing the gap between the U.S. and its adversaries in the hypersonic missile space, is it possible in today's world of fast-moving tech against adversaries who don't play by the same rules that the U.S. has to in terms of regulations and how they build their weapon systems? How likely, feasible do you see us catching up in this arms race?
So I actually feel very, very optimistic. For folks who follow defense closely, there's a lot of pessimism out there right now because of how far behind we've fallen, because of how much difficulty we've had scaling up production of munitions. But I think what we're seeing is actually really encouraging and gives me a lot of cause for optimism, because what we're seeing is the War Department, the Armed Services, the federal government, on a very bipartisan basis, really leaning in, identifying the root cause of the problem, and being willing to do things differently. We're seeing private capital investing in defense in ways that it really hasn't since the Cold War. We're seeing the sort of American engine for innovation and for development building a lot of momentum. I think all of these are really exciting signs. We're seeing some of the most talented engineers in the world come back into the sector in ways that they haven't since the Cold War. And look, I think that we look to our former employer a lot of times, SpaceX, as inspiration, because that is a company that through ingenuity and through private capital and through the right incentives did things very, very differently and now leads the world and has far outpaced our adversaries in space launch. Took the United States from really sort of last place in the West to first by a really wide margin.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm hearing, or the themes that I'm getting from this conversation, is just like, we need to move quickly, have deliverables to the U.S. military. But is there something you can point to that's giving you all a sense of urgency because of global conflicts going on?
I think that you really can't get away from the context of global tensions and the conflicts around the world that really set the stage here. We know how far ahead our adversaries are. I think in a lot of ways, things that were unthinkable 5 years ago, a major land war in Europe, are very thinkable again today. We had the good fortune to live most of our lives for millennials in an era of relative peace and prosperity after the end of the Cold War. And unfortunately, I think what we're seeing is a reversion to the mean. We're seeing a return to a more multipolar world. And there is a lot of urgency to take the steps that are necessary to change the way we develop and manufacture. The speed matters to our customers, but the speed matters because if we're going to preserve peace, if we're going to restore conventional deterrence, our adversaries are moving fast and we need to keep up with them. As a matter of fact, we need to outpace them.
Is there anything else you would like people to know or better understand, whether that be what's happening next here in New Mexico or something broader involving the company?
I mean, we're just very excited to be a part of this community. I look forward to engaging further with the academic institutions, working with the labs. We really want to be an integrated partner here. So we are happy to call New Mexico home.
Completely agree. I think I would close on that note of excitement to be building here and on a note of optimism. The future is not yet written. Our adversaries are ahead today, but they don't have to stay ahead. We have the tools at our disposal to catch up and to surpass them, and we're going to be doing it right here in New Mexico.
Well, Andrew and Meg, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Andrew and Meg from Castelion for sharing their insight to the project that they're working on here in New Mexico. I think in some ways it sounds kind of scary what they're doing, but in other ways it seems really interesting and exciting to see the amount of innovation and just, effort going into what they're doing there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me is just how quickly they've actually moved. We mentioned in that question earlier, just seeing so many large businesses make big commitments about manufacturing centers here in New Mexico. And I think what it is so different this time is, as Andrew said, they have steel going up this week. Come out and look at the site and see that we're actually building there. They were telling us the first buildings will be up in April. The first building will be up in April.
Maybe
so
one of the
it's
differences is the customer in this case, the U.S. military.
That's right.
Well, we appreciate them coming on. If you all have story ideas or people you'd like to hear from on our show, always feel free and reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhardt at krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media.
I'm at Chris McKee TV, also chris.mckee@krqe.com. Thanks for watching and listening.